We were talking to Gene from Gainesville, Florida before the break, and he didn't get his question out, so we'll put him back on here. Hi, Gene. Welcome back.
Hey, Steve. Yeah, thanks. Hopefully this is clear now. Hey, so my question is in regard to the Amillennial's perspective on Revelation 20, verse 7, and your explanation earlier this week. So the three New Testament writers, Peter, Paul, and James, all write about, during their time period, the ongoing and active role of Satan. He's prowling around like a roaring lion. He
Right.
is. He's an adversary to us, is what Paul taught, an active adversary, and then James talks about.
I'm aware of it. Go ahead. What is your question then?
Yeah. So the question is from an amillennial's perspective, how is that reconciled with the aspect that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is really, it's a figurative aspect, and that Satan is unbound at the end of that. Therefore, theoretically, he would still be, he'd be bound in the time.
Okay, I got you. Okay. Yeah, that's about the most common question people have when they first hear about amillennialism, because amillennialism holds that Revelation 20 is symbolically describing the time between the first and the second coming of Christ as the so-called 1,000 years. Of course, it's a lot more than 1,000 years, but the number 1,000 years is thought to be simply symbolic for a really long time without any suggestion of how long that would really be. Now, during that time, according to amillennialism, that time began when Jesus was here the first time, and it will end at the end when Jesus comes back. So we're kind of living in that 1,000 years. But the big question that people have, probably more often than any other, is, isn't Satan supposed to be bound during the 1,000 years? After all, he's loosed again at the end for a little while. That would mean that he was bound when the New Testament writers wrote about Satan roaming about like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour, or those kinds of things, or even now. Is Satan around now? Of course he is. Of course he is. So how could he be bound? Why would someone believe that the binding of Satan took place at the first coming of Christ and that he's still bound until the time at the very end when he's loosed for a little while? The confusion here comes from, I think, misunderstanding what the imagery of Revelation is trying to say. Revelation is not telling us that Satan is literally, nowhere around. This is written in a vision to make the point that Satan has been bound in one activity in particular. Yes, the pictures of him as a snake or a dragon with a chain in a bottomless pit. I mean, this is all the imagery of the vision. But the point that it keeps making is he is bound, it says in verse 3, so that he should not deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were finished. And then in verse 7 it says, and 8, when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out and deceive the nations. Okay, so this is simply a description of Satan being bound with respect to his ability to deceive the nations. It's not saying he's literally bound somewhere. I mean, when Jesus said he had bound the strong man in Matthew chapter 12, meaning Satan, he had bound Satan and was spoiling his house, he didn't mean that Satan was literally in a closet tied up and with the door locked somewhere and he couldn't get out. This is simply making the point that Jesus was plundering Satan's domain and Satan was as helpless to stop him as if he had been bound and was simply watching as a home invader, stole all this stuff and couldn't resist. The imagery of these things is not saying that Satan had literally tied up somewhere or chained somewhere. Jesus was explaining in Matthew 12 that, although Satan is not literally bound somewhere, he's as helpless as if he was bound. Jesus is coming into the devil's territory, taking his stuff, loosing the people who are demon-possessed and letting them go. That's plundering Satan's house. And Satan couldn't stop him any more than a man who owns a house who's tied up could stop a home intruder. Now, the same kind of imagery here, I mean, it's a different image. It's a dragon instead of a man. It's a chain. It's not bound in his own house. But the idea is that Jesus at his first coming has, rendered Satan helpless in areas that he was not previously helpless. Now, when he's loosed again, he will not be helpless in this respect anymore. The binding of Satan refers to him being rendered incapable of resistance or incapable of doing something that he could do before. Yes, it looks very absolute. The dragon's in a pit, the lid's on there, and so forth. He's got a chain on him. That's that's no more literal than the beast is literally an animal with the mouth of a lion and the feet of a bear and the body of a leopard and has 7 literal heads and 10 literal horns that have crowns on the horns. No one takes that literally. No one believes that's a real animal fitting that description. That's how Revelation talks. That's how Revelation describes things. That's how visions are. Zechariah has visions like that. Daniel has visions like that. They are never in literal terms, but they are impressionistic. They have all kinds of details in the vision because a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it might take 1,000 words to describe the picture. But the picture itself is getting across an idea. And the idea is, before Jesus came, the nations, that means the Gentile nations as opposed to Israel, were under the deception of Satan. They were his domain. Only Israel had been selected by God to receive the law, to receive prophets, to receive revelation. The rest of the nation was left to Satan, of the nations. The Gentile nations were under Satan's blindness. They were all worshiping demons, sacrificing their children to idols and things like that. Satan kept them in blindness and darkness, and no one challenged him. Well, Jesus did, because when Jesus came, he defeated Satan at the cross and sent his disciples out to disciple the nations, that is, the Gentiles, and to tell them the gospel. So Satan could no longer keep the nations in deception. Now, somebody said, well, doesn't he still deceive the nations? Well, he deceives people. That's the point. He deceives people. He's the deceiver, to be sure. He roams about like a roaring lion seeking whom he might devour. But he can't deceive the nations as a whole anymore. In other words, there was a time when all the Gentile nations other than Israel were Satan's rightful domain. God allowed him to deceive them. God allowed them to be in darkness. That time has ended. The light has come, and the true light now shines. And it's going out to all the nations. Satan cannot keep them in darkness anymore. Now, can he deceive individuals? Of course. Of course he can. And in every nation there are people who are deceived by Satan. In fact, even Christians get deceived by him some of the time. That's not what this vision is talking about. This vision isn't talking about whether Satan can deceive people or not. It's talking about he's been stripped of any right to keep the nations in deception anymore. They are no longer his domain. They are Jesus' domain. Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Therefore go to the nations and make disciples of all the nations. So the church age is the time when Satan cannot keep the nations in deception anymore. Though he can deceive anyone who wants to be deceived. And apparently plenty of people want to be. But, but those people who live in these nations who didn't have any access to light, to truth, previously, now it's come to them. And that's what this age is about, bringing that truth, bringing that light to the nations. So Satan can't take that whole block of humanity and just say, they're mine, I'm in charge, and they're going to stay deceived. No, the truth has come. Now, the loosing of Satan seems to be the reversal of that. Seems to be, that the truth is somehow hindered again, and Satan manages to get a lot of the nations in blindness again. Now that I don't think that's happened yet necessarily, but I think that's something that will happen at the end. But to say, well, but doesn't the Bible say the devil still tempts us? The devil, he still lies. He still, we're to resist the devil and he'll flee from us. He's like a roaring lion seeking. Yeah, he's all those things. And he was those things even when Jesus said he had bound the strong man in Matthew 12. Jesus had bound the strong man. He said so, but that didn't mean Satan was literally bound somewhere. It's making a point. And to try to extend it to all activities of Satan is simply to go beyond what the passage is trying to say. So the amillennialist doesn't think the devil is literally, it has a chain and he's in a pit and locked up somewhere. We're not saying that's literally happened. We don't think Revelation is literal at all. It's like Daniel. Daniel's not literal either. And Zechariah is not literal. I mean, these kinds of visions are always given in symbolic imagery. There's not one of Daniel's images that are given in literal imagery. And same thing with the Revelation as far as I'm concerned. So anyway, that's how I understand it. Okay. Thank you, Gene.